Priya, we're holding you accountable for the outage. Priya knew it was coming. There was no build-up, no walkthrough of what had happened, no attempt to reconstruct the timeline. Just her name and the decision. For a brief moment, the room was quiet. Not because anyone was confused. Everyone in that room knew exactly how they had gotten there. The outage, the deployment, the conversations leading up to it, none of it was unclear. And still no one said a word. Because this wasn't the meeting where they were trying to understand what happened. This was the meeting where they decided who it would fall on. By the end of that week, Priya would make a decision that most people in her position never make. This is what led her there. 4 days earlier, the system went down. It was one of the highest traffic weekends of the year for retail businesses, and Priya's team was responsible for the infrastructure supporting hundreds of companies. When the platform went down, it didn't fail partially. It failed completely, for 19 hours. Orders weren't delayed, they were lost. Transactions failed in real time, and the losses kept climbing into the hundreds of thousands. The story had started to circulate outside the company, but inside, everything had narrowed to a single room, the war room. War rooms aren't dramatic in the way people imagine. There's no shouting, no cinematic urgency. It's quieter than that. Screens everywhere, logs scrolling endlessly, people speaking in short, precise updates. Every few minutes, someone reads out a number, error rates, latency spikes, failed transactions, and everyone else writes it down like it might change the outcome. Priya had been in that room from the first hour. She was a senior engineer, 5 years into the company, the kind of person teams rely on without needing to say it. Not because she was the loudest voice in the room, but because she was almost always right. Her manager, Owen, knew how strong she was. Her skip-level manager, Derek, had seen it too. Everyone in that room trusted her judgment. And by hour 3, while the rest of the team was still reacting, Priya had already started connecting the dots. She had a quiet but growing sense of what was behind the outage. 3 months earlier, the company had kicked off a major infrastructure change, a new architecture, a new database configuration. It was the kind of upgrade that would improve performance long-term if it held under pressure. The timeline was aggressive. It had to be. The business needed it in place before peak season. 6 weeks before deployment, during a planning meeting, Priya had said something that didn't make it into any document. We haven't load tested this configuration under peak conditions. That worries me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't escalated. It was said the way experienced engineers say things when they notice a risk. Calmly, clearly. Owen nodded and said they would revisit it. Derek said the timeline couldn't move. The meeting moved on. Priya moved on too. She told herself she had done what she was supposed to do. She had said it out loud. She had flagged it. At some point, you trust the people above you and move forward. Priya did. What she didn't know yet was how this story would be told. By the second day after the outage, the system was back up. The next step was the post-mortem. In engineering culture, post-mortems are supposed to be blameless. The goal is to understand what happened, identify the gaps, and make sure it doesn't happen again. You focus on systems, not individuals, in theory. In practice, when the losses are significant and clients are already threatening to leave, something else starts to happen. Not loudly, not in an obvious way, but you feel the shifts. The way things are described, the details included, the ones left out, the language people choose starts to shape a version of events, and that version is no longer about the lessons learned. Priya watched it happen in real time. The deployment was described as a technical judgment call. The timeline pressure wasn't mentioned. The earlier concern about load testing never came up. Owen, her manager, nodded along. He didn't correct anything. He didn't add context. And slowly, the conversation started narrowing toward the configuration change and toward the person who had been closest to it. If you've ever been in a room like that, you know what it feels like to watch the story get rewritten in front of you. Everyone in that room knew the full story. No one interrupted it. That night, Priya sat with the realization of what was coming. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. She knew where this was going to land. 4 days after the incident, the calendar invite came through. Incident review follow-up. Executive floor. She opened the attendee list. Derek, someone from legal, someone from HR, and Owen, her manager, listed as optional. That single word told her everything. This wasn't a review, it was a verdict. They needed a scapegoat, and she had been chosen. Not because she was the only one responsible, but because she was the easiest one to hold accountable. That night, Priya sat with a decision. She could walk into that room and say everything. Name the timeline pressure, the dismissed concern, the conversations that had happened and the ones that hadn't. She could make sure that the weight didn't land only on her, and she would have been right. But it wouldn't change anything. The people above her had already made their choice. They had chosen to protect themselves by sacrificing someone on their team. She had a choice too. She could deflect, pass the blame to the leaders who had failed her, or she could become the leader she wished they were. So she made a deliberate decision. She would take ownership of what was hers, fully, clearly, without shrinking it, and she would not throw anyone else under the bus. Not because they didn't deserve it, but because that's not the kind of leader she was going to become. The conference room on the executive floor was all glass. Priya arrived early and chose a seat with her back to the window. One by one, the others filled in. Derek, HR, legal, and then Owen. He sat down at the far end of the table and immediately looked down at his hands. For the entire meeting, he never looked up, not even once. Not at Priya, not at anyone else in the room. He had been in every conversation leading up to this moment. He knew exactly what had happened. And when it mattered most, he chose silence. Everyone in that room knew the truth. That was what made the silence so loud. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't rush. She didn't try to reshape the narrative. She spoke plainly. She said she had been the engineer closest to the configuration change. She said she had raised concerns about load testing before deployment. She said she had not followed up in writing. She said she had not escalated when the concern was set aside. And she said those were her gaps. She owned them fully. She did not mention Owen. She did not mention Derek. She did not explain the timeline pressure. She said what was hers, and then she stopped. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Derek thanked her for her candor. A formal warning was added to her file. That evening, Owen sent her a message. "I'm sorry about how today went. You handled it really well." Priya read it once and didn't reply. 6 weeks later, she requested a transfer to a different team. It was approved without a conversation. Priya felt two things at the same time. The first was uncomfortable, but clear. She knew she could have done more. A verbal concern is easy to acknowledge and just as easy to forget. She should have put it in writing, copied the people who need to know, and asked Derek, her manager, to sign off on the decision to proceed despite the risk. Not to protect herself, but to make the responsibility real and shared. The second thing she felt was harder to name, but just as important. In that room, she felt it all. Fear, anger, the urge to defend herself. Because in that room, something became clear. The leaders had already failed her. To be thrown under the bus is one of the most painful things that can happen to you professionally. To not throw anyone else under the bus in response, that is the moment. That is the test. And Priya passed it. That's leadership, undistorted.